Emily Carter woke up before the sun rose. The world outside was still wrapped in soft blue shadows, and the air smelled like damp earth and pine. It was peaceful. She stepped out onto her wooden porch with a steaming cup of coffee in one hand and watched the early light stretch across her land. This was her routine. She didn't like surprises anymore. Her farm was quiet and simple, just the way she wanted it. There was a red barn with paint peeling off the sides, a small vegetable garden she'd worked on for years, and an old pickup truck that rattled every time it started. Nothing was fancy. Everything had a story. Emily had been living here with her 10-year-old son Jake for almost 4 years. After her husband died in a car accident, she left the city and moved out to this small town in the Midwest. No one knew much about her past, and she liked it that way. They knew she was a single mother. They saw her working the land alone, fixing broken fences, lifting heavy bags of feed, and selling vegetables at the Saturday market. They thought she was quiet, maybe even fragile. But they were wrong. What they didn't know was that before she became a farmer, Emily had worn a different uniform. She had been one of the few women ever to serve as a sniper in the U.S. Army's elite Green Berets. Her eyes had seen more than most men ever would. She had operated in foreign lands, tracking dangerous targets, sometimes from miles away. Could hold her breath longer than most people could run, and she could shoot the wings off a fly if she wanted to. But that life was over now, or so she hoped. Jake didn't know much about that side of her. She told him only the basics. That she used to be a soldier, that she was good at her job, and that she had left because she wanted to give him a better life. He didn't ask many questions, and she didn't offer more than needed. To him, she was just Mom, the woman who made pancakes in funny shapes, who always knew when he was lying, and who hugged him so tightly when he cried that he forgot why he started crying in the first place. The town they lived in was called Red Bluff. It had one diner, one school, one gas station, and a lot of land. People minded their own business. Strangers stood out. But Emily made a quiet place for herself there. She fixed up the old farmhouse with her own 2 hands, filled shelves, repaired plumbing, and even rewired the electricity. She planted fruit trees, taught Jake how to collect eggs, and learned how to cook meals from scratch. It was hard work, but it was honest, and it gave her peace. Sometimes at night, when the wind howled through the trees and the barn creaked, Emily would lie awake, staring at the ceiling. Memories would come, some soft, some sharp, like broken glass. The sound of gunfire, the hum of a helicopter, the silence after a clean shot, faces of teammates she'd lost. She would breathe deeply, count backward, and remind herself she wasn't in the war anymore. She was home. Jake was safe. That's all that mattered now. Jake was growing fast. He had his father's brown eyes and Emily's stubborn chin. He loved books about space and dinosaurs, and he had a habit of asking 1,000 questions before bedtime. Emily tried to answer all of them, even the strange ones. He helped her on the farm, carrying small buckets and feeding the chickens. And she taught him how to use a screwdriver and how to tie knots. She was raising him to be kind, strong. Most of the neighbors liked Emily. They respected how hard she worked, even if they didn't understand why she chose to live alone. A few men tried to ask her out, but she politely turned them down. Some whispered that she was just too sad to move on. Others said she was just proud, but none of them knew the truth that Emily didn't trust easily. Not anymore. Her farm sat on the edge of a forest, far from the town center. Some thought it was too isolated, but Emily preferred it that way. She liked hearing birds instead. Of cars, she liked having space where Jake could run free, where no one could sneak up on her. She had built the land to be her shield, her comfort zone. But she also kept a few secret things from her old life that she never got rid of. In the basement, hidden behind a locked metal door, was a room she called the quiet room. It had no windows, just concrete walls. Inside were her old army gear, maps, a rifle she swore she'd never use again, and a few supplies. Batteries, first aid kits, a radio, and emergency food. She never told Jake about the room. It was just in case. She didn't think she'd ever need it. Still, she kept it ready. One morning, as she was gathering eggs from the chicken coop, Emily noticed something strange. A set of tire tracks in the dirt near the back of her property, fresh and deep, from a truck. She hadn't driven that way. In weeks, she paused, stared at them, and listened. Nothing, just the wind. She didn't panic. She just made a mental note. That night, she double-checked the locks on the doors and windows. She told herself it was probably a hunter or a lost hiker. Still, she took a flashlight and walked the property line. Old habits die hard. Her footsteps were silent. Her eyes scanned the dark like a hawk. The next day at the market, she overheard a conversation between two farmers. They talked about someone breaking into a nearby tool shed, stealing fuel and power tools. Another mentioned his gate had been cut and his horses spooked. The sheriff, they said, was investigating. But he had too much land to cover and not enough deputies. Emily listened quietly, but her mind was alert. She felt something familiar in her chest, that tightness that came before danger. She pushed it down. Maybe it was nothing, but maybe it wasn't. Back home, Jake was playing with his toy rocket ship in the yard. Emily smiled, but her eyes kept scanning the tree line. She didn't want to scare him. She didn't want to live in fear. But she also knew better than to ignore signs. She had spent years reading people, watching patterns. And something here wasn't right that evening. She sat on the porch with her coffee and thought about the life she'd built. It was quiet. Yes, but not weak. She had worked hard for peace, but peace didn't mean unprepared. If trouble came, she would face it. Not because she wanted to, but because she had to. For Jake. For the life she had fought to build. And somewhere deep inside was the part of her that had once walked through enemy territory and waited in silence for hours. That part was still awake. It never truly slept. It just waited for a reason. A few days passed, and Emily Carter's life returned to its normal rhythm, or at least it looked that way on the surface. She fed the animals, watered the garden, helped Jake with his homework, and went to bed early. But her eyes didn't sleep. As deeply, and her ears caught every creak and whisper in the night. She had learned long ago that danger didn't always come loudly. Sometimes it waited. Sometimes it watched. On a Thursday afternoon, while Jake was drawing pictures of rockets, at the kitchen table, Emily stood at the sink peeling potatoes. The radio buzzed softly in the background with country music, and the wind pushed against the windows. The house smelled like garlic and herbs. Everything seemed peaceful. Then the phone rang. It was Mrs. Taylor from the local coupe. Her voice was trembling as she told Emily that someone had broken into her greenhouse the night before. They'd taken expensive tools and left behind cigarette butts and boot prints. This was the third incident this week in their little town. The sheriff, Mrs. Taylor said, was asking people to lock everything up and report any suspicious activity. Emily thanked her, hung up and wiped her hands on a towel. Her heart beat a little faster, but she kept her face calm for Jake's sake. She walked to the back door, opened it, and stared out at the trees. She didn't say anything, but in her mind, she was already planning. That night, after Jake went to sleep, she climbed up into the old hayloft in the barn. She lay flat on her stomach, just like she used to in the field, and watched the edge of her land through a pair of binoculars. She stayed there for nearly 2 hours. It was cold, the wooden floor rough beneath her, but she didn't move. She was patient. She had been trained for this, and then she saw a flicker of light deep in the woods. A flashlight just for a second, then gone. Most people might have ignored it, thinking it was nothing. But not Emily. She knew what she saw. The next morning, she drove into town and picked up supplies. She bought new padlocks, motion lights, and batteries. At the hardware store, she picked up a trail camera, the kind hunters used. She installed it herself, hiding it carefully near the back fence, angled toward the woods. Jake noticed her working more around the farm. "Why are you locking everything up now?" he asked, squinting in the sun. "Just being safe," she said with a smile. "Sometimes people get desperate. We need to be careful." He nodded and went back to playing, but she saw the worry in his eyes. That night, she sat beside him in bed and told him a little more. Not about the army, just enough to prepare him. If anyone ever comes here who shouldn't, she said gently, you go into the basement. You remember the hiding spot we built last summer, behind the storage rack? The one with the blankets? Jake's eyes widened a little. Yeah, you stay there, no matter what you hear. You don't come out until I come get you. Understand? Nodded. Serious now. Is someone going to come? I don't know, she said truthfully. But if they do, I'll take care of it. That same night, just past midnight, her camera caught something. 2 men were standing at her fence line. One of them had a cigarette in his mouth. The other carried what looked like a bolt cutter. They didn't come through, but they stayed for almost 10 minutes, whispering, pointing toward the barn. Then they walked away. Emily watched the footage 3 times, then saved it on a flash drive and locked it away. Her hands were steady, but her jaw tightened. These weren't kids playing around. These were professionals, or at least dangerous. Men who thought they were. A few days later, she heard about them. Their names weren't spoken loudly in town, but enough people whispered. Rick Dalton, that was the leader. A man in his early 40s, rough, scarred, and known for 2 things: taking what he wanted and scaring people enough that they didn't talk to the police. He wasn't from Red Bluff. He had drifted in about a year ago, working odd jobs, then suddenly had a crew of 5 or 6 men around him. They all had records: petty, theft, assault, intimidation. No one could prove anything lately, but everyone knew. They were behind the robberies, the threats. The quiet fear that was spreading. Rick had a way of picking his targets. Small farms, places far from the sheriff's route. He never went for places with security systems or big dogs. He picked the weak, or who he thought were weak. That's when Emily realized something. They were watching her, testing her. They hadn't broken in yet. They were waiting, checking her routines, seeing if she had anyone around. Maybe they thought she was just another single mom living on a big piece of land. Easy pickings. They didn't know they were wrong. She spent the next 3 days preparing. First, she rigged up a silent alarm system using fishing line and bells 1. Across the barn door, another near the chicken coop, and 1 at the gate, invisible in daylight. It's impossible to miss at night. Then she cleaned her old rifle. It had been locked away for years, wrapped in cloth, stored in a box at the very back of the basement's quiet room. Her hands hesitated when she unwrapped. It wasn't fear, it was respect. She hadn't touched this weapon since her last deployment. She never thought she'd need it again. But it was still perfectly balanced, oiled, and ready. Like her, she didn't want to use it. She hoped she wouldn't have to. But she knew that hope was not a plan. She also checked her escape routes through the woods, toward the river. Just in case, she packed a go-bag for Jake. Flashlight, snacks, water, warm clothes. She practiced drills with him without calling them drills. What if we had to leave the house fast? She asked. Jake blinked. Like a fire? Exactly. What would you do? He repeated the steps she'd taught him. She nodded, kissed his head, told him he did great. The next night was quiet. Too quiet. Emily stayed up, sitting in the living room in the dark. A rifle rested against the wall beside her. Her phone was fully charged. The wind moved the trees outside, making shadows dance on the walls. Every sound felt louder in the silence. And then at 2:13 a.m., she heard it. The bell near the gate rang soft, barely noticeable. She moved like a shadow, grabbed the rifle, checked the chamber. No panic, just pure focus. She slipped out the back door, barefoot, silent. The grass was cold under her feet. She stayed low, moved to the side of the house, and waited. Voices 2. Maybe 3. We go in through the barn, one of them whispered. No lights, grab what we can. Fast. Emily didn't breathe. She waited until they were all inside the barn, then she moved, not toward them, but around. She locked the barn door from the outside with a heavy chain and used a carabiner to fasten. It shut. Then she walked calmly to the front of the barn and stood in the moonlight. Morning. Boys, she said loud enough for them to hear. A moment of silence, then loud banging. Who the hell's out there? I live here, Emily replied. And you're trespassing. One of them cursed. Another kicked the door hard. You better let us out, lady. Or what? she said, raising her voice just enough. "You're locked inside. You can wait for the sheriff, or you can come out with your hands where I can see them." They didn't know who they were dealing with. One of them tried to bust the side window. Emily was already there. She raised. The rifle didn't shoot, just aimed. The man froze. Her silhouette in the moonlight was enough. He backed away. "Your leader's not here," she said. "No, tell him this. You've picked the wrong farm." She stayed until the sheriff arrived, flashlight in hand, confused at first but quickly impressed. 2 men were arrested. They didn't say much, but Emily saw it in their eyes. They were scared, not of jail but of her. The other outlaws hadn't come that night. Only 2 were sent to test her, and now Rick Dalton knew he had a problem. Emily knew it too. This wasn't over, but now the rules had changed. She wasn't just some woman living in the woods. She was a ghost from another world. One they didn't understand, and she was ready. The next morning, Emily woke up to silence, but not the peaceful kind. It was a heavy silence, the kind that presses down on your chest and makes the world feel like it's holding its breath. The barn was still locked. The sheriff had taken the 2 intruders to jail. Jake was safe, still asleep upstairs, his arms wrapped around his stuffed dinosaur. But Emily knew this wasn't the end. She made herself a strong cup of coffee and stood at the kitchen window, watching the tree line. Somewhere out there, Rick Dalton had found out what happened. His men were caught and worse beaten at their own game. Emily had embarrassed them without firing a shot. Men like Rick didn't let that go. Emily had dealt with people like him before, in places far from home. Men who ruled through fear, who believed strength was in numbers and violence. But she also knew one truth they always overlooked. The most dangerous person in any fight is the one who stays calm. She spent the day checking every corner of her land. The back gate had a fresh dent near the lock. Someone had tested it. Her motion light had been twisted sideways. These weren't accidents. They were warnings. Messages. "We're watching you." "We're not done." That afternoon, Jake helped her pick apples from the tree near the house. He laughed, climbed the lower branches, and begged for pie. Emily smiled, played along, and baked it for him. But her thoughts were somewhere else. Timing, shadows, lines of sight. She was calculating again, just like in the field, when Jake went to bed that night. She locked every door and placed the flash drive from her trail camera in her pocket. Then she drove into town and met with Sheriff Brad Morgan. Brad was a decent man, late 40s, tired eyes, too many problems, and too few resources. When Emily showed him the photos, he rubbed his chin and let out a low whistle. "You really think it's Dalton's crew?" Emily nodded. 2 are in jail. The others won't let this slide. Brad leaned back. "I don't have enough to hold those 2 for long. No one wants to testify, and we're stretched thin." "I'm not asking for backup," she said. "I'm asking for time." He looked at her for a long moment. "You're not just some farm girl, are you?" Emily didn't answer. She didn't need to. Back at the farm, the night air was thick with tension. Emily didn't go to bed. She sat in the living room again, her rifle leaning nearby, eyes focused, ears sharp. At 2:41 a.m., she heard something new. The barn doors creaked. She moved quietly, staying low, stepping around the parts of the floor she knew would squeak. Outside, the sky was dark and clouded. She used her old night vision scope, the one she hadn't touched in years. She spotted them. 3 figures. One at the barn. One near the chicken coop. One moving toward the side of the house. They were better prepared this time. No lights, no noise. But so was she. Emily didn't aim to kill. That wasn't her goal. She wanted a message just as strong as theirs. She waited until the man near the coop stepped into the open. Then she squeezed the trigger not to hit him, but to graze the metal bucket behind him. The sound was sharp, echoing in the night like thunder. The man dropped to the ground, panicked. The others froze. Emily, hidden on the roof now, watched. Calmly then, she whispered into the radio she'd planted earlier in the barn. A speaker hidden inside kicked on. Her voice came out low and steady. "You have 10 seconds to run." The men didn't wait. All 3 scattered like scared dogs. One tripped over a wire she'd set near the fence and crashed into the mud. The others vanished into the woods. Emily didn't chase. She didn't have to. The message had been sent. The next day, she found a knife stuck in her fence post. A dirty piece of cloth was tied around it, a gang sign. Threat. Jake asked her what it was. Just trash, she said, taking it down. But she knew what it meant. Rick Dalton was angry now. He's embarrassed. He wouldn't send boys next time. Would come himself. Emily called her neighbor Mrs. Hanley, a kind older woman who had once helped her fix the water pump. "I need a favor," Emily said. "Can Jake stay with you for a few days?" Mrs. Hanley didn't ask questions. "Of course. Is everything okay?" Emily's voice was calm. "It will be." That evening, she packed Jake's clothes, his toothbrush, his favorite books. Told him they were going on a little adventure. He pouted but didn't argue. She dropped him off. She hugged him tightly, maybe a little too long. "Why aren't you coming?" he asked, confused. "I have work to do," she said softly. "I'll come get you soon." She drove home alone. The wind was strong, bending the trees, howling across the empty land. She walked through her farmhouse slowly, checking every door, every room. Then she went to the basement, the quiet room. She turned on the light and stared at the gear she hadn't touched in years. Her tactical vest, her combat boots, her headset, her old sidearm. Everything was still there, untouched, waiting. She didn't feel fear. She felt something else. Focus. Stillness. That night, she set traps around her property. Nothing deadly, just enough to slow people down, make noise warn. She made tripwires, pressure sensors, spike strips hidden under leaves. She placed mirrors on trees to catch moonlight and show her where. People moved. She knew they would come. They had pushed her too far. And now she was awake. It was the third night after Jake had left that it happened. A truck pulled up just beyond. The tree line lights off. 4 men climbed out. She watched from the attic window, her thermal scope showing their bodies glowing red against the dark forest. Rick Dalton was among them. He walked differently, confident, like someone who'd never been stopped before. The others spread out. One circled toward the barn, one toward the back of the house, one crouched near the generator. Rick moved straight for the porch. Emily waited. The man at the generator bent down to cut the power. Soon as he touched the wires, the small charge, Emily had rigged blue, a sharp burst of sparks, not enough to hurt him badly, just enough to blind and scare. He screamed. Fell back. Emily used the sound as cover. She slipped through the shadows and took position behind the shed. The man near the barn hit a wire and a loud alarm bell rang out. Confusion spread. "Rick," one of them shouted. A setup. Too late, Emily stepped out of the shadows and fired a warning shot into the air. "Next one goes through a leg," she said clearly. "Drop everything and get on the ground." Rick didn't move. He turned slowly, staring at her. He had a short beard, deep scars on his hands, and dead eyes. "You think you're scaring me?" he growled. Emily didn't blink. "No, I think. You're used to scaring others. That ends tonight." One of his men bolted. He didn't get far. Another tripwire sent him flying into a ditch. Rick raised his gun. Emily fired first. The bullet hit the porch post, just inches from his hand. He stared at her, stunned. "I don't miss," she said. He dropped the gun. Moments later, red and blue lights filled the sky. Sheriff Brad had followed her GPS signal, came with backup this time. They arrested the men one by one. Rick didn't speak as they handcuffed him. He just stared at Emily like he was seeing something ancient and powerful. As the police drove away, Emily stood alone in the dark, the wind pushing her hair back. She didn't smile. She didn't relax. She just breathed. The farm was quiet again, but it wasn't the same kind of quiet. It was the kind you earn. After the sheriff and his team took Rick Dalton and his men away, the night fell quiet again, but this quiet felt different. It wasn't the calm of a safe home or a peaceful land. It was the silence that follows a storm, the kind that makes you feel like the world is holding its breath again. Emily stood in the same spot near the porch. not moving, not celebrating. The wind brushed against her face, and the moon lit up her tired eyes. She didn't feel victory. She felt alert. Her instincts, sharp as ever, were whispering, "It's not over." Rick had looked at her in a way that made her skin crawl. He hadn't been shocked or scared, not the way his men had been. No. Rick had been studying her, measuring her, as if her strength didn't frighten him but challenged him. She'd seen men like that before, dangerous men, proud men. They didn't stop until they were broken or dead. She barely slept that night. When the sun came up, she sat at the kitchen table. With her coffee, her hands steady but her mind racing, something told her Rick wouldn't stay in jail long. Not because the sheriff didn't care, but because the system moved slow and Rick moved fast. Emily made a decision. She called Mrs. Hanley. "Keep Jake one more night," she said. "Tell him I love him. Is everything okay?" Mrs. Hanley asked again. Almost Emily replied and hung up. By late afternoon, she began preparing, not just defending. She was done waiting. She opened the quiet room one last time and took out gear she hadn't touched in years. Her sniper rifle, ghillie suit, and a compact radio she'd fixed herself. She moved with focus, as if no time had passed since her last mission. The farm became her battleground. She set up defensive positions across her land, one near the shed, another in the barn loft, and a third behind the large oak tree near the creek. She checked every trap she'd made. Then she went deeper. She dug in a few surprise element smoke bombs, blinding lights, and loud alarms. By sunset, she knew her land like a chessboard. She was the queen, and she had no plans to lose. Later that night, just as she expected, she received a call from the sheriff. "I don't know how, but Rick's out," he said, angry and tired. "Some lawyer from the city came in, said we didn't have enough to hold him past 48 hours. Bail posted." Just like that, Emily nodded, though he couldn't see her. "Thank you for letting me know, Emily." Brad hesitated. "You should leave the farm for a while. Come stay in town." "No," she said firmly.
"He knows."
"Where I live, he's not done, and neither am I." There was silence on the line. Then Brad said, "Call me if anything happens." "I will," she said. But they both knew if something happened, it might be over before anyone could help. She hung up and sat by the window. Watching the road, she didn't have to wait long. Just past midnight, a black truck pulled up near the tree line. No headlights. No engine noise. It rolled in like a shadow. This time, Rick didn't bring a crew. He came alone. Emily narrowed her eyes. That meant something. He wasn't hiding behind others now. He wanted this personal. She stepped outside quietly, her boots soft against the ground. She carried no flashlight, just her night vision goggles and her rifle on her back. The moon was half full, casting silver light across the land. The trees swayed and the barn creaked softly. She moved silently to the back of the property and took position behind the large stone wall near the garden. Rick didn't come through the front gate. He was smarter than that. She watched as he crawled through the side ditch, rolled over the fence, and began moving toward the house low and fast. He was wearing black gloves, boots, a pistol on his hip, and a long knife in his belt. Emily watched him move. He was skilled, not some street thug. No loud steps, no wasted movement. She could tell he had some kind of training that confirmed it. This wasn't just some gang leader. Rick had a history. Maybe military, maybe mercenary. Now he was treating this like a mission, so would she. She waited until he passed the coop and stepped near the garden shed. Then she triggered the first trap aloud. Screeching alarm that burst from the speaker under the porch. Rick spun around, gun drawn, confused. Emily didn't move. She wanted him unsure. Off balance, he ran toward the barn for cover. That was her second trap. As soon as he touched the barn door, a smoke bomb exploded, filling the area with thick gray fog. He coughed, stumbled backward, waving his arms. He's trying to see. That's when Emily stepped out of the shadows. "Drop your weapon, Rick." Her voice came through the fog, steady and cold. He turned, searching. "You think this scares me?" "I don't care if you're scared. I care if you stop." He fired into the air blindly. Emily didn't flinch. She'd already circled around behind him. She moved like a ghost. years of training guiding her steps. Rick shouted into the smoke. "You think you're smarter than me?" "Oh," she said, stepping out behind him. "I know I am." He turned just in time to see her raise the rifle. This time she didn't aim to miss. The bullet hit his hand, the one holding the gun. He screamed and dropped it, clutching his wrist. Blood ran down his arm. Before he could recover, she charged at him and kicked the knife from his belt. Then she forced him to the ground with her knee pressed into his back. He thrashed once, but she pressed harder, locking his arms with a zip tie from her pocket. He growled through his teeth. "You're not normal. You're not just a woman on a farm." Amelie leaned down and whispered, "You're right. I'm not. I'm a mother, soldier, and I warned you." Grabbed his collar and dragged him across the yard like a sack of potatoes. Her strength surprised him. Tried to fight again, but she knocked the air from his lungs with a single punch to the ribs. Minutes later, the sheriff arrived, breathless, eyes wide. "You got him?" Emily nodded. "He's not walking away this time." Rick lay on the ground, wheezing. He stared at her with hatred, but also something else. Fear. Respect. He knew he had lost. Brad cuffed him and called for backup as they loaded Rick into the squad car. Brad turned to Emily. "You okay?" She looked out at her land, her home, the place she had tried to protect without violence until she had no choice. "I am now," she said quietly. That night, Emily didn't go back inside right away. She walked her land from end to end, checking every trap, every wire, every place where the enemy had stepped. This was her home, and now it was safe again. Not because of fences, not because of weapons, but because she had stood her ground, because no one would take what she loved without a fight. The morning after everything ended, the sky was clear. No smoke, no gunshots, no alarms. Just the quiet sounds of wind blowing through the trees and birds singing on the fence posts. Emily Carter stood on her porch, arms crossed, eyes scanning. The land in front of her, it looked the same. The grass was still damp. The barn was still standing. The sun rose in the same way. But something deep in her chest had changed. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she could finally breathe. Rick Dalton had been taken away in handcuffs. He had bruises on his face, blood on his shirt, and rage in his eyes. But this time, he didn't fight, he didn't threaten, he didn't speak. Emily's actions had broken something inside him, not just his hand, but his pride. Sheriff Brad Morgan made sure Rick was locked up with no way out. Charges were filed. Evidence was solid: photos, recordings, the stolen items from other farms. Emily had given them everything. This time, Rick's name wouldn't be whispered. It would be known on court papers and in the news. Word spread quickly in Red Bluff. The town wasn't big, and people talked. Everyone had heard pieces of the story, some true, some stretched. But they all knew one thing now for sure. Emily Carter was not just a quiet woman living on a lonely farm. She had stood her ground against a dangerous gang and brought down a man who had been feared for years. Neighbors who once kept their distance started showing up at her gate. They brought pie, soup, tools, and quiet apologies. "You need anything?" "Just ask," one man said. "Didn't know you were a war hero," said another. Emily didn't want praise. She wasn't interested in being called brave or tough. She hadn't done what she did to become a story people told. She did it for Jake, for peace, for the land she had built with her own hands. The day after Rick's arrest, she picked Jake up from Mrs. Hanley's house. He ran to her, arms wide, his little backpack bouncing on his shoulders. "Mom," shouted. She knelt down and hugged him, tighter than ever before. "Are we going home now?" he asked. "Yes," she said, her voice soft. "We're going home." On the drive back, Jake looked out the window. The trees passed by, the sky bright and full of clouds. "Were there bad guys?" he asked suddenly. Emily didn't lie. "Yes." "Did they come to the farm?" "They tried." "Did you stop them?" She glanced at him, then back at the road. "I did." Jake was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Did you do army stuff?" A small smile touched her lips. A little. He nodded like that made perfect sense. "I'm glad you're my mom." She reached over and squeezed his hand. When they arrived home, Jake ran to check on the chickens, the apple tree, and his toy rocket hidden behind the barn. Everything was just as he'd left it. Emily walked through the house slowly, noticing the little thing's muddy footprints at the back door, a bullet mark on the porch post, the burned-out smoke bomb near the barn.
Oh, yeah.
These were signs of a fight. But more than that, they were signs of survival. Her home had been tested, and it had stood strong. In the following weeks, life began to settle. Emily replaced the broken locks. She took down the tripwires and alarms. The rifle went back into the quiet room, along with the night vision scope and the gear she hoped she'd never need again. But she didn't close the room entirely. She left the light working, the shelves clean, and everything neatly arranged. Just in case, Jake went back to school, told his teacher he had been at a secret mission place with his mom. The teacher laughed and said he had a good imagination. Emily returned to her garden. She planted new carrots, trimmed the vines, and rebuilt a part of the fence that had been damaged. The work felt different now. Before she had done it to create peace. Now she did it because she had earned it. One day the sheriff came by. He didn't wear his uniform, just jeans, boots, and a tired smile. "Thought you might like to know," he said, sipping coffee on her porch Dalton's facing. 10 years minimum. His lawyer dropped him. There's talk of moving him to a federal prison. Emily nodded. Good. Brad looked at her for a moment. "You did something real out here, Emily. Something the rest of us couldn't. People feel safer because of you." "I didn't do it for the town," she said. "I know, but the town still thanks you." He left shortly after, tipping his hat. The next week, Emily and Jake took a walk through the woods behind their farm. The path was muddy, and Jake wore his rain boots, stomping through puddles. "Can I learn to shoot?" he asked, out of nowhere. Emily stopped walking. "Why do you want to?" "So I can protect our farm, like you." She looked at him carefully. "One day," she said, "but first I'll teach you to listen, to notice things." "To understand," Jake grinned. "Like how you always hear me sneak cookies?" "Exactly," she laughed as they walked. She thought about her past, her missions, her old team, the people she'd lost. Those memories still lived inside her. But now, they didn't control her. They were just part of her, like roots under the soil. Invisible, but strong. She had come to this place to escape war. Instead, war had found her. But this time, she didn't run. She fought not with rage, but with discipline, skill, and love. She didn't want to be a hero. She didn't want medals or stories told in her name. She just wanted a quiet life with her son. And now she had it, not because the world gave it to her, but because she fought for it. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, she still woke up. The wind would sound like footsteps. The creak of the barn would make her heart race. But instead of fear, she felt calm. She would get up, walk to the window, and look out. The land was hers. The silence was earned. And if anyone ever tried to take it again, he'd learn what Rick Dalton had learned too, that you don't pick a fight with a mother who used to be a Green Beret sniper, not if you want to walk away.